All right, Purdue gets a very entertaining, dramatic win over Alabama here, 92-86. I think you saw the best and the worst of both of these teams in this game, which makes it very fun to analyze. We got Brian Rauf from Heat Check CBB here. I am GregWaddell from Sleepers Media. And before we start, we should just acknowledge Brian is doing this live in the middle of a tornado warning, which is kind of a nice homage to what college basketball teams must feel like trying to deal with Zach Edey, because he just destroys everything in his path.
He does. And we talked in the preview, Bama's front line is virtually non-existent, and they just tried to use their fouls on him, which was a strategy that worked for a while. But eventually, like, you need guys to throw at him, and they kind of ran out of guys. But nonetheless, like, Zach Edey is going to win National Player of the Year again. There's been no signs of anybody even competing with him, let alone any drop off in play. He's actually probably gotten significantly better, I think, than last season. He is what he is. He's the most reliable thing in the sport.
Yeah. Unstoppable force at a generational level. I used the G word in a tweet after this game. And, a couple of the egg Twitter accounts were at me like, oh, he's got 3 losses in the NCAA tournament. We can't be saying generation. I don't care. Like, I do not care about what has happened in March. We can talk about that in March. For who this player is on a game-to-game basis during the regular season, I have never seen a player this dominant in my life. There isn't one. Like, Oscar Tshiebwe, dominant on the boards. We've seen players dominant in elements of the game. Luka Garza was a back-to-back National Player of the Year. Dominant offensive force. Zach Edey dominates in every possible capacity that there is on a basketball court. He's elite defensively because of how great he is and how little he fouls. He's elite offensively, and he's even been missing some bunnies he normally makes this year, but it doesn't even matter. He still finishes with 35. How about 11 for 11 from the free throw line? Like, people act like that's not a skill. Like, the people that criticize, like, what does he even do? He's just big. Well, he makes all his free throws. Like, imagine if Shaq made all his free throws. Nobody would be able to do anything.
Right. Zach Edey is not the first person who's 7'4" to play college basketball. No. Right. But he is the only one who is talked about this way because of the skill that goes along with it. Just because you can't block his hook does not mean that it's unstoppable and goes in all the time. Like, that's an added bonus that you can't block it. But there's a touch that goes along with that. There's the skill of not fouling, knowing how to block shots without jumping and putting yourself in foul trouble. Being tall helps, certainly. We all know this. But to say he's just tall totally discounts everything else that he is good at. He is somebody who opposing teams have to account for 100% of the time on both ends. It is not something if we need to worry about Zach Edey when he gets the ball in the post. It is not, we can't shoot the ball at the rim when Zach Edey's there. It is a constant 100% of the time, how do we work around Zach Edey? And he's the only player in the country who's like that. And I think, at least that I can remember in recent memory, he's the only player who I think is all-consuming to a game plan like that.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable to watch. His sidekick in this one, Braden Smith, was spectacular, for lack of a better word. He finishes with 27, 5 rebounds, 8 assists to just 1 turnover. Braden Smith was a big dialogue staple during the offseason. Big Ten people underrated him. Big Ten people left him off of preseason top 25 lists. I think Purdue people were loud that they liked him, but I don't even think Purdue fans necessarily knew he was going to become this quickly. Look, he's not doing what he did in this game every single game, but there is a visible difference between the way Braden Smith approaches the game right now than where he finished last season. And I know he had some hiccups at the end of the Northwestern game, but to me, he's a much more willing shooter. I think he's hunting his own offense in a way that this team needs it. And to me right now, I think he's clearly a top 5-6 point guard in the country. Am I crazy for saying that?
He's definitely top 10. You know, I don't have the list of point guards in front of me, but I can say top 10 comfortably without worrying about that. The number you brought up that was most important is 1 turnover.
Yeah.
Right. Because we've seen him have great scoring games before. We've seen him have great passing games before. But when they fell apart down the stretch, and particularly in the NCAA tournament, he was turning the ball over a ton. And against Northwestern, in those key moments, turning the ball over a ton. Alabama pressured Purdue's guards a lot. and really got underneath them. And that's the kind of thing that Purdue, and particularly Braden Smith, have struggled with. The quickness in your face, having to handle it. And he handled it well. This was we talked in the preview, this was going to be a test. And it's one that he passed, certainly, right? The points, assists, all that is fantastic. But for me, with him moving forward, you pair that with the lack of turnovers, that's key, because that's what's going to matter moving forward. I trust Braden Smith enough at this point to know he's going to be a productive offensive player for me as long as he's not turning the ball over. And the fact he did it in this game, very, very beneficial.
Yeah, it's special. When he plays like that, it's going to be very tough to beat Purdue. Now, with that said, Alabama gave it their best shot. And I think coming into this game, you and I maybe had more concerns with Alabama than things we would praise them on. Now, I think we correctly assessed that when Alabama plays well, they're the ones kind of dictating the outcome of the game. Like the way Alabama plays, they are susceptible to, if they play well, they're probably winning the game. And if they play poorly, they're probably losing the game. It doesn't really matter what your opponent does. To me, Alabama played as good as they possibly could have through the first 20 minutes of this game. They were up 2 points at halftime. I think that speaks to where Purdue is at and how good they are. It also speaks to Alabama's very, very high ceiling. Mark Sears was spectacular, 35 points. He hit 8 3-pointers himself. He attempted 16 3-pointers in this game. Does this game make you reassess your vision of Alabama for the season?
No, this was peak Alabama. And I really think they lost because of the deficiencies defensively. That's been a major issue for them all season. And Purdue put up 92 on them, 90 plus points. It's certainly not the first game Bama was giving up 90 plus points, and it probably won't be the last game this year. Both these things can be true where Purdue is unstoppable when they get going, they get performances from Smith and Edey like they did. It is also fair to say that things may have been a little bit easier because of the way Alabama played on that end. They brought a lot of intensity and a lot of effort the first 10 to 15 minutes of the game. Then guys got into foul trouble, and they had to take their foot off the gas a little bit. And that's when Purdue came back into things, because Alabama can't maintain, or at least has not shown they can maintain, that level of defensive effort, intensity, and just play, connectiveness for 40 minutes. And that was what was impressive about the start for me. It eventually wore off. They shot them well enough to keep themselves in it, which they made a lot of threes, shot a lot of threes, had a lot of open threes too, which, you know, if I'm Purdue, that's the one thing I might look at. Okay, like, yeah, they made a lot of threes, they shot a lot of threes, but we got to get some more hands and faces, which was good. But I think they just weltered away. Like, if they didn't shoot as well, if they had a normal 3-point shooting game, this is a 15 to 20 point win for Purdue, more than likely. So you have to give Bama credit for the way they shot it, but I still come away feeling like defensively that it's not there with this team. Yeah, there is a ceiling.
I think I will just say I agree with everything you just said. For me, it does change my view of Alabama, though, mostly because I think I was pretty low on them. Like, I've never given this team real thought that they could win the SEC. I like multiple other teams in that conference more when it comes to March, like who can make a deep run. I haven't seen the star power with this team, and I knew the limitations they have defensively. This game makes me feel a lot different because I view Mark Sears as a guy who can single-handedly win you a game now. Yeah. And to me, look, they got to get a little more from other guys. I thought Estrada was pretty horrible in this game. Nelson was, he had his moments, especially early. He hit 2 early threes where it's like, oh, he can kind of actually make Zach Edey pay today. And they need that to be more consistent. But I will just say, despite the defensive concerns, I need to take Alabama a little more seriously, and that's a takeaway I had from this game. We've now made it, I think, 10, maybe 12 minutes into this preview, and we haven't talked the elephant in the room. This is going to spin a little negative, but I think it's a fair and honest conversation, Purdue fans. It's also something you and I disagree on. So let's get into it, Brian. You've been pretty vocal that this team is more or less the same as last season's version. When Alabama jumped out to the early lead, you did fire off a tweet about it. You were in the group chat about it. I had to get my little response back. I said Purdue will win by 10. I ended up missing that mark by 4 points, but the point stands. I see a lot of differences in this team. You don't. Why?
I don't see a ton of significant differences. We mentioned the number of open threes Alabama got. That's a concern. When they were up double digits early on, it was because they were able to maintain defensive pressure. I'm pleased with the way Braden Smith handled that, because those have been situations where he has melted down previously. But that was still a concern. It threw Purdue's offense completely off. And Bama just didn't have the horses or the wherewithal, the ability to continue that for more than the stretch that they did. Shooting, at least early on, was still iffy. You had Lance Jones firing up shots that, at least to me, were very clearly not going to go in. But he shot them, and I think that's what you kind of need, is somebody who at least is that threat. Alabama's a smaller team, spaces you out. Playing two bigs and having like a more traditional forward in the 4 spot for Purdue, Alabama kept getting switches until they could exploit that matchup. I think that is still something of a concern if Purdue doesn't utilize it on the other end, which they still do not. I think this Purdue team is slightly better from the standpoint of, I think Edey has improved, and I think Braden Smith has improved. But the core issues of handling pressure, perimeter defense against quickness are still concerns. And Purdue is more than 6 points better against Bama. And yes, Bama shot incredibly well, but I think some of those deficiencies in Purdue helped Alabama play the way they did, and why this was closer than it probably should have been.
Okay. I think that's fair. I guess I'll go game specific, and maybe this will transition into broad for me. Specific to this game, Lance Jones and Fletcher Loyer were disasters. Both of them individually were disasters. And I don't think that's too harsh. Fletcher Loyer is baffling to me, and maybe I need to step back and acknowledge the fact that he is a lawyer, and this shouldn't be baffling when I have seen what his brother Foster's entire career looked like. Fletcher is a much better player than his brother. He had great moments last season, including like in the second month of his career, he had like 7 straight games in double figures against good teams. He hasn't been that ever since that stretch. And I don't know if it's a scouting report thing, if defense has figured out that he's not quick, you can get into him. He doesn't have burst, whatever it is. He's been uncomfortable ever since. The infuriating part of Fletcher Loyer is that right when you write him off and say he's not good enough, he does what he did to Tennessee in Maui, where he was just brilliant. 27 points. Yeah. He was super aggressive. He got to the line 11 times. He made 3 threes. Like, he can do this against the best defenses in the sport. He just doesn't do it consistently enough. And Alabama's not a good defense. So this, despite the quickness, like, there should have been crevices and openings for him to take advantage of here. And look, I thought he missed his first shot, and it just altered the way he mentally approached the whole game from there. I don't know if it's a confidence issue or what, but he was nearly unplayable in this game. And then Lance Jones, who is the guy everyone is adamant is the swing piece, right? He's the guy who is the change from last season. Lance Jones has had awesome moments this season. He's had good games this season. He's scored in double figures more often than he hasn't. But I still don't fully buy the jumper, and part of it is a shot selection thing. He just takes some crazy ones that, quite frankly, he's not that level of shooter to take some crazy ones. I still think he's struggling with how to play off of Zach Edey in a way the rest of the offense isn't, and it's obvious. Like, there's 1 to 2 plays a game where he tries to force a pass from the wrong angle and just throws it out of bounds or throws it at Edey's back. And in this one, the elephant in the room is that he got torched defensively in this game. And look, we made a big deal about it after the Northwestern game where Painter kept letting him switch off of Boo Buie, and the other guys were the ones that couldn't guard Boo Buie. In this game, it was Lance Jones that couldn't guard Mark Sears. Mark Sears destroyed him for 27 minutes till Lance Jones was on the floor. So I don't see, like, he has moments of impact defender brilliance, but then he has moments of chaos and just not fully there mentally. So look, I think both of those things are huge red flags that do matter, that in a lot of ways do point to your point that they're not that different from last year. My only flip would be, I think last year, if their 2 guard and their 3 guard played as poorly as this, Purdue loses the game every single time. But they didn't this year because Braden Smith got better. They didn't this year because when Lance Jones was a disaster, Miles Colvin actually came into the game and got them a critical steal and hit a three. Like, I think they need Colvin and Heidi to end up playing more minutes and cut into Fletcher Lawyer's minutes, especially a little bit. But I see the pieces with this team impacting the game in small ways, even if the mainstays aren't. And I think that's something to keep an eye on as we get further down the season. Last note on this from me, Trey Kaufman-Renn, 10 minutes. He's the starting four. He was minus 20 in 10 minutes in this game. And he hit a three. Like, he hit the shot he normally doesn't hit.
Yeah.
I think that has to be a change, Brian.
It does. He was the main culprit of Bama trying to get switches on him and attacking him. Like, it was clear that he could not handle this, right? And I want to make sure that I make it clear, like, we're looking at Purdue through the lens of making a Final Four and winning a national championship, because that's where they're at. Last year, the Fairleigh Dickinson loss, that's going to be a big thing for them to overcome. But when I look at them from improvement or being worse, I'm looking at the overall picture. They won the Big Ten last year. There were some issues, but they were a really good team. And this team is still really, really good. I think even at their worst, top 5, top 4 team in the country. Right. But there are issues that are why they lost that game and why they struggled down the stretch. And those are the only things we can talk about in terms of, are they going to fall short again or not? Because that's the question of this Purdue team is, are they going to fall short again or not? The questions are still there. Like, there have not been the obvious answers of, no, they can handle this now. Like, that's the concern is, yes, they're very good. We know what they can be and what they look like when they're at their best. And Edey and now Smith are probably the best duo in the country. But there are still these things where it's like, we need to kind of see the matchups in the NCAA tournament to figure out how far they're going to go.
That's totally fair. And I will say I had a gut feel, like a pit in my stomach feel. I think it was Sears again. He hit a huge three late, cut it to either 2 or 3 with about 2 minutes left. And you just had that PTSD feel of, this is where Braden Smith gets tight. We've seen it. We saw it against Nebraska. He ends up losing his head. He does some chaotic things here. Braden Smith came down, had an assist, drop off to an uncontested dunk from Zach Edey, and had a bucket late to secure the game. So I think, like, this was, to me, the first really good sign and step forward of the game was in Braden Smith's hands against a high-quality opponent, and instead of flipping it negatively, he flipped it positively. He needs to keep doing that consistently. And the hard part of this is Purdue doesn't play a lot of close games. That's the thing, is like, in the Big Ten, especially this year, they are going to win 15 games by 7 to 20 points. And it's almost hard to get the reps of pressure moments for these guys in a real game setting against a high-level opponent until you get to March. So I think this was really good for them that they got through it. They remain undefeated, 3 straight years now of non-conference undefeated ball. And, you and I can keep debating for the rest of the season how different they are. I'm sure this will be a conversation that keeps coming up. That's Brian Rauf from Heat Check CBB. I'm GregWaddell from Sleepers Media. Boilers, stay tuned, because we will have more previews and recaps for your team every single game this season. Subscribe to Sleepers Media so you don't miss any of them.